The winter of 1847 came early to the Montana Territory, sweeping down from the Canadian reaches with a fury that old-timers claimed they hadn't seen in 20 years. Snow fell in thick curtains across the valleys, burying the sparse trails that connected the scattered settlements, transforming the landscape into a white wilderness where only the hardiest souls dared to venture. In a narrow valley sheltered by pine-covered ridges, a small cabin stood against the elements. Smoke rose from its chimney in thin wisps, a sign of life in an otherwise frozen world. This was where Molly Patterson lived with her father, Thomas, a man who had once been known throughout the territory as one of the finest hunters and trappers to ever track game through these mountains. That reputation belonged to another time, to a man who could scale cliff faces like a mountain goat and who knew every animal trail within 50 miles. The Thomas Patterson who now lay on a crude bed near the cabin's single window was a shadow of that legend. 3 years earlier, he had fallen from a rocky ledge while pursuing a bighorn sheep, tumbling 30 feet onto an outcropping that shattered his hip and left his legs twisted and useless. The local doctor had done what he could, but in this remote country, what he could meant little more than setting bones that would never heal properly and offering whiskey to dull the endless pain. Molly had been 17 when it happened. She was 20 now, and the girl who had once helped her mother with cooking and mending had transformed into the sole provider for their small household. Her mother had died giving birth to a stillborn son when Molly was 12, leaving her to learn the harsh lessons of frontier survival under her father's patient instruction. Those lessons had served her well when he fell, though neither of them could have imagined how thoroughly their roles would reverse. She had inherited her father's broad shoulders and strong build, but where his frame had been muscular and powerful, hers carried extra weight that drew comments from the townspeople whenever she made the difficult journey to Cedar Falls for supplies. At nearly 200 pounds on a 5'5" frame, Molly was considerably larger than the other young women in the territory. The mountain life required hard work, chopping wood, hauling water, hunting small game, but it also required enormous quantities of food to fuel a body through the brutal winters, and Molly's body held on to every calorie with stubborn efficiency. The fat girl carrying the whole household on her back, she'd heard Mrs. Henderson say at the general store, not quite quietly enough. Others were crueler. When her father dies, no man will have her. Unless maybe that heartless mountain man takes pity, though I doubt he has pity in him. The heartless mountain man they spoke of was Jed Coulter, a figure who had become something of a ghost story in the valley. He lived higher up the mountain than anyone else, in a cabin that most people had never seen. He came to town perhaps twice a year, always alone, speaking only when necessary to conduct his business, selling furs, buying supplies, and disappearing back into the wilderness before anyone could engage him in conversation. The rumors about Jed had started 5 years ago, after a trapping expedition went wrong in the dead of winter. A group of 6 men had headed into the high country, and only 3 had returned. Jed was one of them. The others told a story of a sudden blizzard, of the group getting separated, of Jed choosing to save himself rather than search for the missing men. "Left them to die," was the phrase that circulated through Cedar Falls. "Man without a heart" became his epithet. Jed never defended himself. He never corrected the story or offered his own version of events. He simply withdrew further into the mountains, and his silence was taken as confirmation of his guilt. Parents used him as a cautionary tale. Be good, or the heartless mountain man will come for you. Young men proved their courage by hiking partway up the trail to his cabin before losing their nerve and turning back. Molly had seen Jed only twice in her life. Once, when she was 14, he had passed through town while she was at the general store with her father. She remembered him as tall and lean, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of winter ice. He had glanced at her father, and something had passed between them, a nod of recognition, perhaps respect, before Jed had continued on his way. The second time was 2 years ago, when she'd been struggling to load a barrel of flour onto her wagon. Jed had simply lifted it as if it weighed nothing, set it in the wagon bed, and walked away before she could stammer out a thank you. She thought of him now as she worked to prepare their meager dinner, stirring a thin stew of rabbit and dried vegetables over the fire. Her father was having a bad day, his breathing labored and his face gray with pain. Winter was always hardest on him, the cold seeping into his damaged bones and making every moment an ordeal. "Molly," he called out, his voice weak. She ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to his bedside. "Right here, Pa." "Need to get to town," he said, trying to push himself up on one elbow. "Need to see Doc Mitchell. Something's wrong. Worse than usual." She felt a spike of fear. Her father rarely complained, never asked for help. If he was requesting the doctor, his condition must be serious. "It's nearly dark, and there's weather coming in. I can see the clouds building. We'll go first thing in the morning." "No." He gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Now, Molly, please. I can feel it. Something's wrong inside. Can't breathe right." She looked into his eyes and saw genuine fear there, something she'd never seen before. Thomas Patterson had faced grizzly bears and survived blizzards, had set his own broken bones and stitched his own wounds. If he was afraid, there was reason to be. "All right, Pa, let me hitch up the wagon." The journey to Cedar Falls normally took 3 hours by wagon, following a winding trail that descended from their valley through a series of switchbacks before joining the main road. Molly worked quickly, preparing her father for the trip. She wrapped him in every blanket they owned, heated stones by the fire to place around him for warmth, and packed bread and water for the journey. Getting him into the wagon was the hardest part. Despite her strength, maneuvering his dead weight from the bed to the wagon required all her skill and determination. He cried out several times, and she could see the sheen of sweat on his face despite the cold. His breathing had become more labored, a wet rattling sound that terrified her. By the time she had him settled and the horse hitched, full darkness had fallen. The first snowflakes were beginning to drift down, fat and lazy for now, but she could smell the storm on the wind. This was going to be bad. She climbed onto the wagon seat and snapped the reins. The old mare started forward, pulling the wagon onto the trail. Behind her she could hear her father's ragged breathing. For the first hour they made decent progress. The trail was still visible, and the snow was light enough that it wasn't accumulating. Molly kept the mare moving at a steady pace, not wanting to risk injury to the horse but knowing that speed was essential. Then the storm hit in earnest. The wind rose suddenly, howling through the pine trees and driving the snow horizontally across the trail. Within minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Molly could barely see the horse in front of her, could only trust that the mare was following the trail by instinct and memory. How much further?" her father gasped from behind her. "About halfway, Pa. Just hold on." The wagon lurched suddenly, tilting at a dangerous angle. Molly felt the axle snap, heard the splintering of wood over the roar of the wind. The wagon settled hard to one side, and the mare neighed in panic. They were stuck. Molly jumped down from the seat, sinking into snow that was already 6 inches deep and accumulating rapidly. She checked the damage in the dim light of the lantern she'd brought. The rear axle had broken completely, probably hit a rock hidden under the snow. The wagon was unusable. She went to her father, whose breathing had become even more labored. His lips had a blue tinge in the lantern light. "Pa, we're stuck. I'm going to have to get help." "Leave me," he whispered. "Get yourself to town." "Don't be ridiculous." She looked around desperately. They were somewhere on the lower portion of the trail, still miles from town, with a blizzard raging and darkness all around. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Even if she could walk to town, her father wouldn't survive the wait, and she couldn't carry him that distance. That's when she remembered. Jed Coulter's cabin was closer than town. She'd never been there, but she knew it was somewhere above them, higher on the mountain. If she could find it, or even find a trail that led to it, she had no other choice. Unhitching the mare, she fashioned a rough sling from blankets and ropes, tying her father onto the horse's back as securely as she could. He was barely conscious now, the cold and his condition taking their toll. She took the lantern in one hand and the mare's bridle in the other and started walking uphill into the storm. Time became meaningless. She had no idea how long they'd been moving. 20 minutes? An hour? Her legs burned with effort, breaking trail through deepening snow. The lantern barely penetrated the white wall of the blizzard. She was operating on instinct and desperate hope, angling upward and to the left where she thought Coulter's cabin might be. When she saw the dark shape ahead, she almost didn't believe it. But no, there it was. The silhouette of a man leading a horse-drawn sledge, appearing like a ghost from the storm. Jed Coulter. He saw her at the same moment and immediately drove his sledge forward. Up close, she could see his face, weathered and hard, with ice forming in his dark beard. His eyes, those cold blue eyes she remembered, took in the scene instantly. The half-frozen girl, the horse with a dying man strapped to its back, the desperation of their situation. Molly recognized him, and a complex tangle of emotions washed through her exhaustion. Gratitude, certainly, but also fear. This was the heartless mountain man, the one who had left his companions to die. Would he help, or would he prove the rumors true? "Doctor," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "My father needs doctor." Jed moved with swift efficiency, untying her father from the mare. "Town's too far. He won't make it. My cabin's 10 minutes from here. I've got a fire, medical supplies." His voice was rough from disuse, but clear and decisive. "Put your horse behind the sledge." Molly wanted to argue, wanted to insist they continue to town, but looking at her father's blue lips and shallow breathing, she knew Jed was right. She nodded mutely. Jed lifted her father, all 160 pounds of him, as if he weighed no more than a child, and arranged him carefully on the sledge among the pelts Jed had been hauling. Then he looked at Molly. "You ride too. You're hypothermic." "I can walk?" "You'll die if you try. Get on." She climbed onto the sledge, and Jed covered them both with additional furs from his load. Then he took the lead, driving his own horse forward into the storm, pulling Molly's mare behind. True to his word, they reached his cabin in what felt like no time at all. It was larger than Molly had expected, built solidly of hewn logs and chinked against the weather. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. Jed drove the sledge right up to the door, then carried her father inside while Molly stumbled after them, her legs barely holding her up. The interior was a single large room, warmly lit by a fire in a fieldstone hearth. There was a bed in one corner, a table and chairs, shelves lined with books, supplies, and what looked like medical equipment. The cabin was clean and well organized, not at all the lair of a heartless savage as she'd half expected. Jed laid her father on the bed and immediately began working. He built up the fire, set water to boil, and gathered supplies from his shelves. Molly watched in a daze as he mixed herbs with practiced hands, preparing a steam tent to help her father breathe. He'd learned these techniques from the Blackfoot, he explained briefly, during his years in the high country. "You should rest," Jed told her, indicating a chair by the fire. "You're in shock. There's coffee in the pot, still warm." But Molly couldn't rest. She poured herself coffee with shaking hands and watched as Jed worked on her father with surprising gentleness. He listened to Thomas's chest, frowned, and began applying heated compresses. He prepared a strong-smelling tea from his herbs and patiently got her father to drink it, supporting his head and murmuring encouragement. Hours passed. Her father's breathing seemed to ease slightly under Jed's ministrations, though he remained unconscious. Molly found herself dozing despite her worry, the warmth of the cabin and her utter exhaustion pulling her under. She woke several times during the night. Each time, Jed was there beside her father's bed, checking his breathing, adjusting the steam tent, adding wood to the fire. The mountain man never seemed to sleep, never left his post. In the flickering firelight, his harsh features looked almost gentle as he placed a cool cloth on her father's fevered brow. Down in Cedar Falls, rumors were already spreading. When Molly's wagon had been found broken on the trail the next morning by a group of men heading up to check their trap lines, panic had set in. The Patterson girl and her father were missing in the blizzard. Someone remembered seeing Jed Coulter on the trail the previous evening. "He's taken them," Mrs. Henderson declared in the general store. "Lord knows what he'll do. That man has no conscience." "Maybe it's revenge," suggested Tom Baker, who'd been on the ill-fated trapping expedition. "Old Tom was there that winter. Maybe Jed blames him for the others talking." Sheriff Williams tried to organize a search party, but the storm made it nearly impossible. The men who ventured up the trail could barely see their hands in front of their faces, and the snow was now waist-deep in places. They'd have to wait for the weather to break. The storm raged for 2 days. During that time, Molly and Jed existed in a strange liminal space, bound together by her father's fragile condition. Jed showed her how to prepare the herbal remedies, how to recognize the signs of improvement or decline. They spoke little, but a kind of understanding developed between them. On the second morning, her father opened his eyes. "Jed," he whispered, his voice hoarse but clear. Molly leaned forward eagerly. "Pa, don't try to talk, you need to—" "Jed Coulter," her father said again, more strongly. "That you, son?" Jed came to the bedside. "Yes, sir, Mr. Patterson." Her father's eyes filled with tears. Knew I recognized you, even through the fever. Molly girl, do you know who this man is? The mountain man, Molly said uncertainly. The one who saved my life, her father interrupted. 10 years ago, in the worst winter this territory ever saw. Molly stared. But the stories? They say he abandoned his companions, left them to die. Her father made a sound that might have been a laugh if he'd had the strength. Stories. Damn stories. That's all they are. He gripped Jed's hand with sudden intensity. Tell her the truth. Jed looked uncomfortable. It's old history, Mr. Patterson. Doesn't matter now. It matters to me, Molly said. Please. Jed was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. It was December 1842. 6 of us went up into the high country on a long trapping run, planned to be gone 2 months, come back with enough pelts to set us up for years. Your father was the leader. He was the best tracker, knew the mountains better than anyone. He paused, gathering the memory. We were 3 weeks in when the storm hit. Not like this one. This is bad, but that one was biblical. Temperature dropped 40 degrees in an hour. Visibility went to nothing. We were strung out along a ridge, checking our trap lines when it came in. I was with your father and another man, Jack Stevens. The other 3 were further up the ridge. When the storm hit, we got separated immediately. We tried to find them, but in those conditions, you couldn't see 5 feet ahead. Your father made the call. We'd make for a cave he knew about, hole up, wait for the storm to pass, then we'd search. Thomas nodded weakly, tears running down his weathered cheeks. Tell her the rest. We made it to the cave, but by then, Jack was already frostbitten bad. We got a fire going, tried to warm him up, but he was in bad shape. And your father, he'd hurt his leg in the whiteout, twisted it bad, could barely walk. The storm lasted 3 days. By the 2nd day, our wood was running out, and Jack was delirious. Your father, he ordered me to go, said I was the only one with a chance of making it back to town, getting help, said if I stayed, all 3 of us would die, but if I left, maybe I could bring back a rescue party in time. Jed's jaw clenched. I didn't want to go. Felt like abandoning them. But he was right. I was younger, stronger, uninjured. So I went. Took me 2 days to reach town, fighting that storm every step. Soon as I got there, I collapsed. When I woke up, I told them exactly where the cave was, drew maps, told them about the other 3 who were further up the ridge. Sheriff organized a party, and I went back with them, despite the doctor's orders. By the time we reached the cave, 5 days after I'd left, Jack was dead. Your father was barely alive, but alive. The Blackfoot had found him, brought him into their winter camp, taken care of him. When we got him back to town, he was so sick he didn't wake up for a week. And the other 3, Molly whispered. The Blackfoot had found them too, in a snow cave they'd dug, saved all 3. But by the time the rescue party found them and got them back to town, the story had changed. Thomas picked up the thread, his voice gaining strength. I was unconscious for a week. By the time I woke up and could tell people what really happened, the story had already spread. Someone, I never found out who, had told the town that Jed abandoned us, ran to save himself. When the truth came out, those 3 men should have corrected it. They knew Jed had gone for help on my orders, but they were embarrassed. They'd survived by luck and the kindness of natives, and they'd been treated as heroes for enduring the storm. Admitting that Jed was the real hero would have diminished their story. So they stayed silent, let the rumor stand. And Jed, he never defended himself. Jed shrugged. Didn't see the point. People believe what they want to believe. Molly felt tears streaming down her face. All these years, the things people said about you? Doesn't matter, Jed said again. What matters is your father is alive now. That's twice I've had a chance to help him. I'm grateful for it. Thomas looked at his daughter. This man saved me twice, Molly. First, by going for help when it meant walking through a killer storm. Second, by sitting beside my bed all night, using skills he learned from the people who saved me the first time. If that's a man without a heart, then I don't understand the word. The storm broke that afternoon, the clouds parting to reveal a sky of piercing blue. Within hours, they heard voices outside. The search party from town had finally made it through. Sheriff Williams nearly fell over when he opened the cabin door and found all three of them alive. His eyes went from Thomas, propped up in bed and looking weak but alert, to Molly, exhausted but unharmed, to Jed, who stood by the hearth with his customary expressionless face. "Thank God," the sheriff said. "We thought, well, never mind what we thought. Tom, are you all right?" "Better than I have any right to be," Thomas said. "Jed here saved my life, again." The sheriff's confusion was evident. "Again?" "It's time people knew the truth," Thomas said firmly. "Get everyone to the church Sunday. I've got a story to tell." The journey back to town was slow and careful. They made a litter for Thomas and carried him down the mountain, with Jed's sledge bringing up the rear. Molly rode beside her father, and she noticed how the men from town looked at Jed, with suspicion and unease. Only Sheriff Williams seemed willing to meet his eyes. When they reached Cedar Falls, the whole town turned out. Mrs. Henderson rushed forward with blankets and hot soup. Dr. Mitchell immediately began examining Thomas, and through it all, the whispers started. The mountain man had them for 2 days. What do you suppose happened? Sunday came. The small church was packed, every pew full, and people standing along the walls. Molly sat in the front row with her father, who had insisted on being carried to the service despite his weakness. Dr. Mitchell had confirmed that he'd had pneumonia, complicated by his old injuries, and that without Jed's quick treatment, he certainly would have died. Jed hadn't wanted to come. "This isn't necessary," he'd told Molly, but she had asked him, and something in her eyes had made him agree. Now he stood at the back of the church, looking deeply uncomfortable as Pastor Williams invited Thomas to speak. With Molly's help, Thomas stood, leaning heavily on a cane. His voice was weak but carried in the hushed space. 10 years ago, he began, 6 men went into the mountains on a trapping expedition. Only 3 came back immediately. There were stories about what happened, stories about a man who abandoned his companions to save himself. I'm here today to tell you those stories were lies. He told them everything. About the storm, about his injury, about the order he'd given Jed to go for help, about the Blackfoot who had saved him and the other men, about waking up to find that the truth had been twisted into something ugly. "I was too sick to correct the story right away," Thomas said, "and by the time I was well enough, the damage was done. Jed Coulter had already left town, gone up into the high country. I tried to set the record straight, but people wanted to believe the dramatic version. The man who survives by betraying others. It's a better story than the truth." He looked around the church, meeting the eyes of his neighbors. "This week, that man saved my life for the 2nd time. He took in my daughter and me when we were dying in a blizzard. He stayed awake all night caring for me, using medicine and skills he learned from the very people who saved me the first time. He asked for nothing, expected nothing." Thomas's voice grew stronger. "If you want to call someone heartless, look to yourselves. Look to the people who spread rumors without knowing the truth. Look to the men who stayed silent when they could have corrected a lie. Jed Coulter has more heart than this whole town combined." The silence that followed was profound. Mrs. Henderson was crying quietly. Tom Baker, one of the 3 men from the original expedition, stood up. "Tom's right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was one of the 3 up on that ridge. The Blackfoot found us, brought Geets us to their camp, saved our lives. When we got back to town and heard what people were saying about Jed, we should have spoken up. We should have told the truth. We didn't because—" he swallowed hard. "Because we were cowards. We let an innocent man take the blame. I'm sorry, Jed. I'm deeply sorry." Another man stood, then another. All 3 of the survivors from that winter stood and apologized, and then several other townspeople rose to add their own apologies for spreading rumors, for believing the worst. Jed stood silent through it all, his face unreadable. When the apologies finally subsided, he simply nodded once and left the church. Molly found him outside, standing by the horses. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "Your father's a good man," Jed replied. "Always was. Didn't need to do that in there." "Yes, he did, and so did this town." She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the hard exterior to the man beneath. "What will you do now?" "Go back up the mountain. It's where I belong." "Is it?" she asked. Or is it just where you've been hiding? He met her eyes, and for a moment she saw something crack in that icy facade. Maybe both. My father will need help through the rest of the winter, Molly said. His lungs are weak now. Dr. Mitchell says he'll need careful monitoring, someone who knows the herbal remedies you used. I can't do it alone. You're asking me to help? I'm asking you to stop living like you're already dead, she said softly. People know the truth now. You don't have to hide anymore. Jed was quiet for a long moment. Why do you care? Because you sat beside my father all night, Molly said. Because you didn't hesitate when we needed help. Because you've spent 10 years accepting blame for something you didn't do, and I think you deserve better. I'm not good with people. Neither am I, she said with a slight smile. I'm the fat girl who's never been to a dance, remember? The one nobody wants. Anyone who doesn't want you is a fool, Jed said flatly. You carried your father in this household for 3 years. You walked into a blizzard to save him. That takes more courage than most men in this town have ever shown. She felt tears sting her eyes. Then we're both better than what people say about us. Seems so. They stood there in the cold sunlight, two people who'd been defined by other people's words, seeing each other clearly for the first time. Will you come? Molly asked. Will you help us? Jed looked back at the church, then up at the mountains, then at Molly. Yes, he said finally. I'll come. It wasn't a dramatic change, not at first. Jed came down from his cabin twice a week to check on Thomas, bringing herbs and teaching Molly how to prepare them. He helped with the heavy work, chopping wood, repairing the cabin's roof, hunting game. Thomas's condition slowly improved under their combined care. The town's attitude toward Jed changed too, though gradually. Men nodded to him in the street, women greeted him at the store, children no longer ran from his shadow. It wasn't a hero's welcome, Cedar Falls wasn't that kind of place, but it was acceptance, and that was enough. Molly and Jed developed an easy partnership, working side by side without need for many words. They understood each other in the way that people who've both known judgment and survived it understand each other. She stopped worrying about her weight, about what people said. He stopped carrying the burden of other people's lies alone. One spring evening, 6 months after that terrible blizzard, they sat on the porch of the Patterson cabin watching the sunset. Thomas was asleep inside, breathing easily for the first time in years. I've been thinking, Jed said, breaking a comfortable silence, about building an addition to this cabin. Your father's going to need help permanent-like. And you, he paused. You shouldn't have to carry everything alone anymore. Molly looked at him, her heart suddenly beating faster. Are you saying... I'm saying I'd like to stay, Jed said, if you'll have me, not just for your father, for you. She reached out and took his hand, rough and calloused from years in the mountains. I'd like that. They sat there as the light faded, two people who'd been called heartless and unlovable, who'd found something true in each other. The town might tell stories about them, the mountain man and the fat girl who somehow made a life together. Let them talk. They knew the truth of their story, and that was all that mattered. Thomas recovered enough to walk with a cane by the time summer came. He stood beside Molly at the small ceremony in the church where she and Jed spoke their vows, and if there was anyone in Cedar Falls who thought it was a strange match, they had the good sense not to say so. The couple moved into the Patterson cabin, which Jed expanded with his own hands. He never completely abandoned his high mountain cabin. Sometimes he'd go up there for a few days to trap and hunt. But his home was down in the valley now, with Molly and her father. People in town got used to seeing them together, the large, strong woman and the lean, quiet man, working side by side at the market, riding together through the hills. They made a good pair, everyone eventually agreed. Both of them knew what it meant to survive, to endure, to be stronger than anyone gave them credit for. Years later, when people told the story of the winter of 1847, they got most of it right. They talked about the blizzard and the broken wagon, about the man who saved 2 lives by staying awake all night. They talked about the truth that came out in church and the apologies that followed. What they sometimes missed was the quieter story beneath, how 2 people who'd been dismissed and diminished found each other in that winter storm, and how they built something solid and lasting from the wreckage of other people's judgments. The mountain man had a heart after all, and the girl who'd been told no one would want her found someone who saw her exactly as she was and loved her for it. That was the real story, the one that mattered, and unlike the rumors that had nearly destroyed Jed's life, this story was true.